helping getting this done. And our friends at YellowBird, we're a great partnership, and we have a lot of the same goals and trying to help keep people safe in the workplace, right?
Absolutely.
So my name is Ed Taube. I am the lead trainer for the Arizona chapter of the National Safety Council. Been affiliated with them for about 14 years total, about 10 of those as an instructor / trainer. We do a lot of different training: first aid, CPR, AED, defensive driving, workplace safety, work zone, forklift. There's a lot of different things. But truly, the importance of any safety training is to help people go to work, be safe, and come home at the end of the day. That's what we're all about, right? And so today we're going to focus on heat awareness. Now, the objective today is not to make you an expert in heat awareness. It's going to give you an overview of what heat awareness is. We're going to define heat stress and identify what causes it, review some of the statistics. Last year, if you were in Phoenix, it was brutal. We had an absolute record-breaking year. We're going to talk about the different stages of heat illness and what to do. Determine how do you know as an employer, as a lead, as an employee, when you should take some of these precautions. And then talk about some of the control measures that can be implemented to adjust for that. So what is the definition of heat stress? It's the sum of heat generated by the body plus the heat gained from the environment minus the heat lost from the body. So as you're moving, as you're working, your body is generating heat. And you'll know, even if you're working in a colder environment, sometimes if you're working hard, you're going to sweat, your heart rate's going to go up and things like that. So our body is generating this heat. And then if the environment is warmer than our body, it's adding heat to that. But then we also sweat, there's wind, there's other factors that help us dissipate some of that heat from the body. And so the heat stress is basically the difference between what we're gaining and what we're able to dissipate. Now, I will tell you right off the bat, I violated a lot of rules of Zoom and PowerPoint as I put charts and graphs and lots of information on some of these pages. The intent is not for you to be able to read every detail on every page. You will be provided a copy of this presentation, so later on you can go back and put these on your screen, view them full size, and read the content. But today is just to give you that introduction / overview. So there's a lot of factors related, whether it's temperature, previous exposure, heat sources like machinery, steam, that kind of thing, air movement, insufficient fluids, physical exertion. The clothing you're wearing makes a big difference. What is your overall health and physical condition? Are you on medications? For women, are you pregnant? Is there a recent exposure? Are you older? And a really big factor is if you had previous heat-related illness, that can leave you susceptible to more problems in the future as far as being able to tolerate the heat, right? Give me a second, having a problem getting the screen to advance. There we go. So who's most affected by the heat? Most of the deaths that we hear about here in Phoenix and in Maricopa County are people that are unhoused. They're living on the streets. They don't have any shelter. So that's the big number of people that are affected. But outdoor workers, athletes, emergency responders, low-income communities that may or may not have proper air conditioning and ventilation in their homes. So there's just a lot of things: mining, waste management, manufacturing. And part of the issue is that, especially in the workplace, heat illness is often underreported. Somebody doesn't feel good, we send them home for the day, but we don't record that. They're not getting treatment. And there's also a factor that there's a number of people that are in the workplace that may or may not be documented citizens, and they would be concerned about reporting that for that fear. So we believe that heat illness is actually more prevalent than what the reports even show. So here's a quick poll question, and you can just respond with the chat with a 1, a 2, or a 3. So if you're working a hot environment and your coworker becomes ill, would you know what to do? 1 is yes, I've had training and I would know how to respond. Number 2, I've had no training, but to try to help anyway. Or 3, I would call for help, but I don't know what else. So just quickly in the chat, 1, 2, and 3. And Morgan's going to monitor that, and I'll circle back to her in just a minute, and we'll see what some of the results are there. The idea is just to get an idea of where you are as a worker that's exposed to heat, and something happens, do you know what to do? So if you were here last year, it was brutal. We set 19 new daily heat records. There were 645 heat-related deaths recorded in Maricopa County alone. By the way, that's 220 more than the previous year. We had 133 days that were over 100 degrees. 55 of those days were over 110. 35 days where the low temperature exceeded 90 degrees. And in July, between July 10th and 25th, the temperature never got below 90 at any point. And on July 19th, the low was 97. And the problem is when the overnight lows are that high, there's no relief. People working outdoors are adjusting their schedule. They're going to work earlier in the morning to try to compensate that. But when you're starting the day at 97, there's not any relief. And in fact, July last year was the hottest month on record for not only for Phoenix, but any US city. And the average overall temperature was 102.7. And every day, all 31 days of July were over 110 degrees. So it was a tough summer. This chart just shows going back to 1896 when the National Weather Service began recording these things, the average number of 110 degrees or warmer in Phoenix. And you can see by the chart, back when we were largely desert and agriculture, there were not very many, less than 10 days over 110. But as we progressed, got into the 70s, a lot more buildings, a lot more pavement, a lot more things that retain the heat. And you see those numbers are going up and they continue to rise. So what are some of the sources of heat? Metabolic heat, that's what we talked about. When you work, when you're active, that's the heat your body generates. And it's based on your workload and the physical exertion that you're putting out. Environmental heat is the air around you, whether it's outdoors in the sun, indoors in a manufacturing facility, or subject to steam or lack of circulation of the air. The actual temperature, the air movement are big factors here, along with the relative humidity, and then the radiant heat that is produced from some of the machinery that you're working on. So these are all different sources. What are some of the factors? Age, weight, and any other comorbidities, whether you're diabetic or have other medical issues that make you more susceptible to heat. As I mentioned earlier, if you have previous heat illness, that can make you more susceptible in the future. In severe cases, if somebody has heat stroke and they recover, they may actually have to move to a cooler environment because their body just cannot adjust to the heat that they're exposed to. Certain drugs or medications can affect your ability to tolerate heat, along with caffeine. And then being acclimatized. This is a really big deal. People move here from other states, and maybe they're a framing carpenter, and they were in San Diego and they moved to Phoenix. It takes a couple of weeks to become acclimatized to the temperature differences that they're gonna experience here. So those are all really big factors. The other thing that happens is sometimes with our weather, we'll go along, late March, early April, suddenly we will spike 100-degree day or two. And that's when the Weather Service issues warnings. Hey, we have this sudden spike and people are not acclimatized. So they have to be aware of those sudden spikes, right? Now, there's some different levels of heat illness. And before we get into that, let's circle back. Hey, Morgan, do you have kind of results of the chat that you can share?
I sure do. So we had 12 folks say 1 and 3 folks say 2.
Okay, very good. So a lot of people have been trained and know what to do. Others haven't been trained, but hey, we're going to do what we can anyway. We're going to hydrate them. We're going to spray them with water or whatever it is. And I'm glad to see we don't have any number 3 where we've had no training whatsoever. So awesome. Because it's important, especially if you've had training, to identify these different levels of heat illness. And kind of the first level is this exertional dehydration. And in this case, we're sweating and we're thirsty, and we're kind of feeling a little bit off, right? Feeling a little bit fatigued. And this is kind of the beginning where we need to recognize what's going on. And at this point, we want to stop, rest, and hydrate. You know, carbohydrate electrolyte drinks are great. 2% milk, cocoa water, or just regular cool water, not super cold. But the next step beyond that is heat syncope. And some of those symptoms include fainting or dizziness, lightheadedness after prolonged standing or rising. It is caused by dilation of blood vessels in the skin in reaction to radiant heat. And as a result, your blood pressure drops. And anytime we expand the blood vessels, our blood pressure can drop and it causes this dizziness. So first aid steps, sit down in a cool location. Once again, hydrate, rest, and fully recover. This is important. Don't say, I'm a little bit better, I can go back to work. Let's fully recover. Because if not, we move into what's called heat exhaustion, heavy sweating, thirst, fatigue, headache, dizziness, nausea, maybe vomiting. So the core body temperature is usually above 101, 102 in that area. And we have to be a little bit more proactive in this case. So we're going to move the person out of the heat, rest in a cool place. We might remove outer layers of clothing, cool the victim with cool water spray or wet cloths. So now we are actively trying to cool them. And then it's really important for them to hydrate, rest, and once again, fully recover. Because once we get into heat stroke, this is a 911 medical emergency. It is potentially life-threatening. Usually at this point, sweating is stopped. The skin is hot to the touch. It's red, rapid breathing, headache, dizziness, confusion, irrational behavior. And at this point, the person may have convulsions or become unresponsive. And that core body temperature is now in that 104, 105 degree range, which is life-threatening. We're damaging brain cells at that point. So it's important. In this case, we're going to call 911 immediately, move the victim to a cool place, and any way possible, cool them off. If we have a big container, a big tub, put them in an ice water bath, put them under a shower, a running hose, wet cloths, anything we can do to get that core body temperature cooled down as quickly as possible. So really important to identify these different levels of heat and illness and respond appropriately. So, and I apologize, I should have been going through these as I said it. So there's the exertional dehydration, heat syncope. The old guy got behind on the slides, my bad. And then heat strokes, we talked about flushed skin, sweating is stopped. Okay. So how do we know when to take action? As an employer, as a shift leader, as a supervisor, how do we know proactively what to do? So the National Weather Service at weather.gov, it issues advisories, watches, and warnings. And these are different levels of heat awareness that they are projecting or predicting for that day. And they break it down by county. You can go on their website, and for Phoenix, the map of Arizona will pop up, and it'll highlight which counties are affected by these watches, warnings, and advisories. There's an app you can put on your phone, and I've got a screenshot of it. Let me open mine up really quick to see where we are right now, because it is, 9:45 in Phoenix, Arizona. Right now it's 83 degrees, and it's in the orange level, that warning level of if you're working outside doing heavy work, we should take some precautions, right? So this is kind of the early stage. Here's a chart. And once again, I don't expect you to be able to read this thing, but you will receive this later on and you can look at it. And this is a really good chart that I downloaded that kind of gives an indication of temperature and relative humidity and how they interact with each other, because even at lower temperatures, high humidity can cause heat stress. But a lot of times, like this time of year, when we're predicted to be between 100 and 105 today, our relative humidity is going to be pretty low, probably in that 10 to 15%. So there's not a lot of concern with that. Yes, the temperature is hot, but your body's able to cool itself because the humidity levels are low. So this is one method that you can use as a kind of an indicator. You can look at the forecast today and you see the temperature is predicted to be 105 with 60-degree humidity, and you know you're in the danger zones, right? So that's one method that you can use. And we can use, the Weather Service uses what's called heat index, and it's a combination of temperature and humidity only, right? And so that is just, that chart that I just showed you is an example of a heat index. But there's what's called the wet bulb global temperature, which measures in the sunlight. It uses temperature, humidity, wind, cloud cover, and sun angle. So it's got a lot more information to work with to give you information on the safety of working in that environment. So these are examples of thermometers that are used to measure this wet bulb temperature. They're kind of sophisticated. The one on the right has that black globe sits in the sun and absorbs sunlight, so it measures the intensity of the sun. The center part, you put it's wet. You put a wet wick over that, and it's measuring evaporation. And the device on the right is measuring the air temperature. So it gives you this printout or this results of wet bulb globe temperature that's much more useful than just temperature and humidity only. And so we get to what's called this threshold limit. And we have 4 steps. Is we measure the wet bulb temperature and we add an adjustment for the clothing that the person's wearing. And on a construction site, for example, the person's wearing jeans. A lot of times, since they're in the sunlight, they're wearing a long sleeve cotton shirt, and they're wearing high visibility safety vests, and they're wearing hard hats. And so we have to, when we're going to calculate this threshold limit, we need to adjust for the clothing that they're wearing, right? And then we estimate what is the work that they're doing. How strenuous is that activity? And I'll show you a chart of that in just a second. And then we determine that Celsius versus, we're going to determine what actions to take, or the time limit values and exposure values that they can safely be subjected to. So this is an example of a clothing adjustment. If we're just in regular work clothes, long sleeves, cotton shirts and pants, we don't have to make any adjustments because we assume virtually everybody in the workplace is wearing something like it. Same thing with just regular overalls. But anytime we have double layers of clothing and we add that high visibility vest, and now we have to add 3. Some coveralls are made of polypropylene. They don't breathe as well. We adjust for that. And then encapsulating suits like whole body chemical protective suits or turnout gear that a firefighter would wear. These don't breathe at all. And you notice that adjustment factor is 11. So that's a pretty significant adjustment we have to make, right? And then when we're trying to determine the level of activity, this metabolic rate, if we're resting, that metabolic rate is about 115. That would be sitting in the shade, kind of resting. Light duty is, some standing work. Light hand arm work, occasional walking. Moderate is normal walking and some moderate lifting, but heavy handling, walking at a fast pace, and very heavy work, pick and shovel, hammer, all those things are going to be important factors in this metabolic rate. So I put this chart in here just because some of these devices and some of the charts you're going to see are in Celsius. We're not used to that, right? Or centigrade is the other name for that. And so this is strictly a conversion chart from Fahrenheit to Celsius. Once again, we're not going to spend a lot of time with this. It's here for your reference when you review this later on, so you can do some of the math, because when it tells you moderate, heavy, and very heavy work, and the temperatures that, and these are Celsius temperatures, as I mentioned, and so these are around 90 or so that we're talking about, then in the 30s. So based on that, we can determine how much work versus how much rest is recommended. So if we're doing light duty, in 28 degrees Celsius, we can work 75 to 100% of the time and not be overly concerned, as long as we're hydrating as we're doing that. But once we get into higher temperatures or heavier workloads, you see that rest and work cycle changes a lot. And now we're only able to do that sort of heavy lifting or heavy work 50 to 75% of the time, or even lower as those temperatures go up. So this is a good reference point to where you need to take some action and accommodate work versus rest. And this is just a chart that shows some of that same information. The action limit is that dotted line, and on one side is that centigrade temperature, and on the bottom is that metabolic work rate. So this is kind of a visual reference that dotted line level is where you should do something, take some action, and that dark solid line is a level you should never exceed. Okay, so that would be the threshold that you should be subjecting people to. So what are some controls we can put into place to help accommodate for the heat, or and help people be able to function? So if you're familiar with the hierarchy control, which most of you I'm sure are, elimination and substitution are the highest levels. But in this case, we can't eliminate the heat, we can't substitute for something else. So we can start with engineering controls. And these are things that we can do at the area of work, such as increasing airflow, fans, ventilation, air conditioning. If there's a machine that produces heat, put up shields or radiant reflecting barriers to isolate that heat from the workers that are working. Ventilation, if especially in an area where there's humidity and heat being produced, circulating that, blowing that air outside and bringing in fresh air. Using special tools or automating things so that people aren't doing the manual work, that a machine is doing the heavy lifting. Looking for other sources like steam that's going to raise that humidity level, which is really, really dangerous. And if people are working in an outdoor environment, provide shade areas for them to adequately rest and hydrate and recover so they can go back and be more efficient at their job. Administrative controls are the next level, and these are more related to things that we can do from a scheduling, training, policy standpoint. So having a written heat program is really, really important. If you have workers that are exposed to heat, you should develop a written program that's going to address how do we protect these workers. Have that in place, give it to everybody, train to it, make sure everybody knows what it is, right? If we bring on new workers, especially if they move from another environment, give them time to acclimate. So don't dump them into that construction site for 8 hours a day the first week. You're going to kill them. So, schedule them for part shifts, have them do different activities, work them in slowly. Right now, most of the outdoor workers are starting at 5 a.m. because there's light, and that's the earliest part of the day we can start work, and they're done by 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So adjusting the work schedules, providing cool water, encouraging frequent breaks is really, really important, and making sure that they hydrate. Make sure they track how much they're drinking. Not just say, well, I had 2 bottles or what. Keep track of it so that we know they're hydrating properly. We can rotate different tasks. If people are cross-trained, we can have them trade off and do different things that are less strenuous. Training is really, really important, not only for the supervisors but for the workers to recognize those heat symptoms and provide that first aid at those early levels before it develops into the more serious things. And then talk to people about, hey, you are responsible for yourself and the guy next to you, the person on your left, the person on your right. If you see something, say something. If they don't look well, make sure that they rest, get them help, make sure you notify a supervisor. But we're here to help each other be safe on these job sites. So a buddy system is really, really helpful. This is another chart that I don't expect you to be able to read, but I'll provide it to you because this has a lot of information about acclimatized workers, not acclimatized, different temperature ranges, different levels of work, and then how much water they should be consuming, and then how much work versus rest. So you can see at the top line of the chart, if we have acclimated workers in 78 to 80 degree wet bulb temperatures, they can pretty much work continuously as long as they're taking in a half a quart of water per hour, and they'll be safe. But you look one step up to the unacclimatized worker, we need to give them rest, 10 minutes of rest for every hour. So 50 minutes, 10 minutes rest. But as we move to the right of the chart, moderate work and heavier work, we see that those work and rest times do change. And as we move down the chart into the green to yellow and red is never good. Red is danger. And we see that at some point we have to avoid that work altogether. We get into the black area, this extreme. Excuse me. We may have to shut that job down and just stop working at that time of day because it's simply too dangerous to keep doing those levels of work under those conditions. So what are some PPE controls? PPE is the lowest level of protection, but they're important. So hats, wide brim hats that provide shade, light colored clothing, light cotton clothing that wicks moisture and dissipates heat. There are garments you can wear that are water cooled, or you can just spray water on yourself. The problem with just hosing yourself down is you're dripping water everywhere and you can cause a slip or a grip issue. There are cooling vests that are made for people in hot environments that can be very effective. If we're going to use those, I urge you to understand that they add weight and they could restrict movement. And so it could cause some side effects of wearing that garment that may or may not be beneficial as well. So cooling vests can be very, very helpful. There's some really good ones on the market. But just keep in mind, they do add weight and they do restrict mobility. And as I mentioned, we can simply wet somebody down, but we're dripping water and we're causing slip falls. And if your hands are wet, we have grip issues, right? So those are the controls that we can implement on different levels. So I know this was a really fast, quick presentation to get through. Do you have any questions? If you want to put into the chat, let us know, and I have a minute or two to answer some questions. And so, Morgan, if you want to monitor that, let me know if you see any of those.
Absolutely. I am monitoring that, and I'm also going to go ahead and share the web pages and LinkedIn pages to both AC, NSC, and YellowBird as well.
Awesome. And I do have one more page. There's some resources. Weather Service, OSHA, NIOSH. My information is at the bottom of that page as well. But go ahead and put up your information so that people can resource you, your company as well. So
Wonderful.
And do we have any new chats that we need to address?
It's like we don't have anything yet. Julie mentioned we've been educating employees for our clients for a number of years. We also have been using the urine color charts in the bathrooms. General duty clause is the catch-all.
Right, and by the way, OSHA is working on a heat standard, so it's coming. They are actively pursuing that now, so pretty soon they will have some very specific standards that's going to help guide you.
This is great. You know, while we give everyone a moment to add any of your questions to the chat, I went on a camping trip a couple years ago and did not know enough about heat stroke and heat issues. And I went to the White Tank Mountains here in Arizona and decided to set up a campsite and a tent in 100 and probably 5-degree weather with my neck completely exposed. And almost had a full heat stroke, and it was the most wild thing because of how cold your body gets at a point, even though you're so hot. Gratefully, I was able to shelter in the car and go home after that.
And it's probably
Great to know.
something where it might have been advisable to seek some medical attention,
Yeah,
right?
probably.
In hindsight, right? All right, so I want to thank everybody for your time and your participation today. I hope it was helpful. I say this is not intended to make you an expert. This is a high-level 30,000-foot view. We will send you a copy of the presentation so you can dissect this more thoroughly as you have time. So thank you
Absolutely.
very much.
Thank you, Ed, for presenting. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we look forward to more webinars with all of you in the future. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.